name's Amber Evans. I am the Memory Care and Resident Engagement Specialist for LCB Senior Living. And we've been doing these dementia series now for a couple of years. Hi, Brittany.
Hi.
It was actually Brittany at our Salem Woods community that had asked me to do a series like this years and years ago. I was pregnant with I was pregnant and now she's 3. So you know how long ago that was. And they've been really successful. They've really touched the lives of folks that are caring for folks with cognitive impairment, or maybe people who are feeling some of that themselves and want to find out more about it, and anywhere in between. Perhaps you're an adult child on the line, and we just want to be a resource for you. You know, LCB does a really great job as it relates to a lot of things we do, but when it comes to memory impairment and dementia, we really knock it out of the park, and it's something that we're passionate about. So we're a resource for you. Today is really going to be a lot of information. And I do believe that, actually I know that Phil is on the line today and he's recording this. And so there is a recording that will be offered to you if you want it later. And I want to make sure you know that your confidentiality and animosity in this is really important. So if you ask a question, Phil has the opportunity to kind of void out your face and your name and just put the question on the screen. So we want you to feel open to be able to participate and not feel like, oh gosh, I'm going to be recorded for people to see. And really this recording's just for any of you all that would want to participate. So it's going to be about 45 minutes and then some opportunity for questions. But before I get into the nitty gritty of what is dementia, we have 3 of our sales directors on the line today. Brittany from our residents at Salem Woods, Jennifer from the residents at Pearl Street, and Kaylin from the residents at Silver Square, all of which I get to visit. Kaylin, I'll actually see you tomorrow. But Kaylin's going to talk a little bit about the residents at Silver Square, just so you know about that particular community, in case that is a resource that's helpful to you. So I will mute myself and take it away, Kaylin.
Great, thanks, Amber. So the residents at Silver Square, we are part of the LCB Senior Living family, and one of the communities. We're located in Dover, so we're pretty easily accessible off the Spalding Turnpike. So I don't know where you're all located, but if the Dover area is convenient for you, we'd be happy to show you our community. We are currently offering in-person visits, so if anyone's interested, we'd be happy to show you around. If you're not looking for senior living and that's not sort of what you're interested in at the moment, that's perfectly fine. We can always be a resource for you, guiding you in the right direction for dementia care, for yourself or a loved one or anyone that needs our assistance. We're happy to be just a help to you. So you can feel free to give us a call anytime. We can always point you in the right direction. We often find that people have a difficult time with navigating senior care and sort of what all the entities are of it. It can be confusing, but we want to help be a solution for you to be able to navigate this whole process, whether it's for yourself or for a loved one. So yeah, that's sort of our community. And again, just like all the other LCB communities, we do offer independent, assisted, and of course our memory care living options, which is more specific to what Amber will be talking about. So thanks for joining.
Awesome. So let's get started. So like I said, I have all of you muted just so that we can welcome back Linda. Hi, everybody. I see some familiar faces. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see the information that we're going to be talking about. Whoops. So again, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. And last month, for those of you that joined a little late, we talked about the difference between natural aging and Alzheimer's disease. And so that recording is available to you if you wanted to, if you missed it. And so whoever invited you to this Zoom, you can just reach out to them and they can get you that information. And series 2 is Alzheimer's and dementia. What is it? Understanding Alzheimer's disease and different types of dementia. So our main objectives really is to take a look to gain a better awareness of the different types of dementia, but also to gain a better understanding of what it is. Oftentimes I get the question, what is the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? I get that question a lot. So we're going to talk about that. And then signs and symptoms to navigate. This presentation is catered toward a caregiver or potentially an adult child. And so throughout the course of this presentation, it'll kind of be catered towards that. I'm just here, a little background noise. So I'm just gonna see, okay, I think we're good. So part one, understanding dementia, what is it? So I always kind of phrase the beginning of this presentation with a question. And those of you that took this training, that's what I'm so used to saying because I'm so used to training our associates, but those of you that participated in last month's presentation, you might know the answer to this. And so I always pose the question, is dementia a disease? And so you're thinking yes or no, right? And the answer is actually no. Dementia is not actually a disease, it's an umbrella term. It's a symptom. And just as if you were, I'm just gonna move this over here so I can see a little better. It's a classification term for signs and symptoms, and it's an umbrella term that notes cognitive decline. So it's noting that the brain is beginning to fail. And so here's a look at what I mean by that. The next question that I always ask, the next trick question is, how many types of dementia are there? And so think in your head, make a guess maybe, and there's maybe an answer giveaway on this screen, but just think, what do you think? How many different types of dementia are there? And some people will say 5, 7, 20. And there's actually over 100 different diseases that have the symptom of dementia. Over 100 different diseases that create that symptom, that have that symptom of dementia. And so like we talked about last month, somebody can have an irreversible dementia, which are some of these that are listed here that we're gonna go into detail with throughout the course of this presentation, or a non-reversible dementia, which is something called delirium. Delirium can be caused by many different things, but the difference between a non-reversible dementia and a reversible dementia like delirium is that it's reversed. But another piece of delirium is that it can come on very quickly. So somebody with a diagnosable non-reversible dementia, they're gonna have a slow progression of signs and symptoms, especially somebody with Alzheimer's disease. Somebody's actually living with Alzheimer's disease for about 15 to 20 years before they show their first sign or symptom. But delirium is very quick and rapid. It's gonna come on very fast. And it could be related to any of these things, a medication side effect, any sort of mental health concern like depression or levels of anxiety. We talked last month about how post-traumatic stress disorder and high levels of trauma can actually do things to our hippocampus, which is our memory center part of our brain, that can actually that part of the brain takes a back seat, and our emotion-based part of our brain takes a front seat. And oftentimes we don't have the ability to remember that trauma because it's our brain's way of protecting. I again hear just a little background noise, so I'm just gonna see if I need to mute anybody. Okay. These are some other things: B12 deficiency, alcoholism, if there's any tumors in the brain, blood clots, problems with any thyroid, kidney, or liver. So we always want to rule out delirium first. So is somebody experiencing some sort of medical condition or psychological condition that is causing them to have a symptom of dementia? And when we say a symptom of dementia, cognitive decline, struggles with spatial awareness, struggles with memory, all those sorts of things. And if you can hear that 3-year-old that I just mentioned downstairs, I apologize, but this is the new nature of giving presentations in COVID. And so then there's this middle of the road diagnosis, which is mild cognitive impairment, which we went into much detail last month. We're really just gonna look at this briefly. Mild cognitive impairment is neither dementia nor delirium. It's kind of the middle of the road. It's not a natural form of aging. Really, we're gonna talk about how we don't just develop a dementia or a delirium. We don't just develop a dementia. That's not the natural form of aging. Mild cognitive impairment isn't either. It's still an impairment to the brain. So you're gonna notice slight changes. They're gonna be measurable, but you're gonna notice they're gonna be slight. So decline in your cognitive ability, including memory and thinking skills. So and I talked a lot about this last month, but here's the difference. Somebody with mild cognitive impairment, while they have an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's or a related form of dementia, they can still function and carry out their day pretty independently. Somebody with a diagnosable irreversible dementia, it's going to progress and they're no longer going to be able to carry out their own skills and abilities to carry out their day. So if you're on the line and you're maybe on this tonight because you're wondering for a loved one or for yourself, my goodness, am I starting to develop a form of dementia? A great way to kind of test yourself is, let's say that you're getting ready to go to an appointment. And this is what I shared last month as well, because it's the best one. If you're getting ready to go to an appointment, you're trying to get yourself together and you walk into your bedroom and you forget why you're in your bedroom. Why did I come in here? What was I coming in for? You may not remember what you went into your bedroom for, but if you're still able to leave your bedroom and know that you're on your way to an appointment and to go grab your car keys and get in your car and you know how to drive your way there, that's somebody that's able to carry out the functionality of their day. That's not dementia. It could be the beginning, or it could be something like mild cognitive impairment. It could be that this person's experiencing a high level of stress. Stress is going to create cognitive confusion. It's going to help make people forgetful. So there's lots of different things that we want to look at. So it's really important for us to decipher the difference between those irreversible dementias and MCI before we dive into what a true irreversible dementia looks like and what they are. So of course we start with Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common form of dementia. And according to the Alzheimer's Association, makes up for about 60 to 80% of all dementias. So of those 100 different diseases that create dementia, about 60 to 80% of the time, it's Alzheimer's disease. We know that it's irreversible. We know that it's progressive. We know that it slowly destroys memory and thinking skills, and eventually the ability to carry out those simple tasks like I just mentioned. And of course, the greatest risk factor is age, but it's so important for us to know that it is not a natural form of aging. We don't just age and develop Alzheimer's disease. It still is, while it's an epidemic, it still is the abnormal aging process. And so we do have currently about 5.8 million people in the United States are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And we're looking at that projecting to the next over the next 30 years to about 14 million people. Yes, there's lots of more detection. So lots of different things to look at with Alzheimer's disease. I want to talk first about what's happening to the brain. I keep having to move the little camera around so that I can see my notes. So hopefully that's not distracting you. So there's a couple different brain slides I'm going to show here. If any of you are like me, I like to see it. That's going to really helps me to more deeply understand visually. But then we'll talk about some stories to kind of apply it. So if you look to the left there, you'll see a healthy brain. And I'm going to show you a larger picture of an actual brain in a minute. And then you're going to see the Alzheimer's brain. So you see that cortex shriveling up. You see it damaging things like thinking, planning, and remembering. You're seeing the hippocampus that we just talked about. That's playing a role in forming new memories. So the hippocampus and the amygdala, they're part of the limbic system and they play off of each other. And so what happens with Alzheimer's disease is that hippocampus becomes damaged, but the amygdala actually becomes heightened. The amygdala is the part of our brain that controls the memories as it relates to emotions and sensory-based information. And so oftentimes, people with Alzheimer's disease rely, not oftentimes, all the time, rely on sensory-based information to get through their day. So, one of the things we really teach and educate our frontline associates at LCB is finding ways to tap into our residents, our reflections residents, our memory care residents, to tap into their amygdala. So we give them tangible things that they can understand. We'll tap into the amygdala part of the brain, which is the part of the brain that's functioning at a higher capacity. And then the ventricle spaces. So I believe my next slide is going to show that is going to show that a little better. So the ventricle-filled spaces are those little squigglies that you see. So if you see in that normal brain, you see that it's a beautiful color, you see that it's larger. I mean, this is an actual brain scan. So you can see the degeneration, the discoloration, and you can truly see that the brain is shrinking. But the thing that I find really powerful to kind of prove a point about memory and about forgetfulness and about carrying out functionality of the day is if you look at those little ventricle filled spaces, those squigglies, and I wish I had a little pointer that I could show you, but you know, over on the left, on the normal brain, you'll see that those squigglies are close together. Let me see if I can, you see that they're close together. But on that Alzheimer's brain, they're a little farther apart. So what's happening is our brain is always firing neural pathways and synapses and feeding us with information to go from A to B, to drive from home to work, or to take a sip of water, or to get in the shower, or triggering us to tell us that we're hungry. So what happens with that Alzheimer's brain is, as a neural pathway triggers, it goes to jump to a different part of the brain to move us into an action step. So you'll notice in that normal brain, as that neural pathway triggers, it doesn't have to jump very far to get to the next part of that synapse. So it can, if I'm thirsty, it triggers to say I'm thirsty, I take a sip of water and I put my drink down. But in that Alzheimer's brain, what happens is that synapse or that neural pathway, it dies off in that ventricle filled space. So it triggers and says, oh, I'm thirsty, and it goes to jump to action, but it dies down into that large space and we never move to action step. But we're still thirsty. And so we never have the ability to fully carry out our needs, whether it's knowing how to get dressed, knowing how to carry out those simple, basic pieces of information that the brain is giving us. And that's why eventually somebody who develops Alzheimer's disease does need someone to have full care and cueing and attention for them. So just a few things that's helpful, that I find helpful, and some of the things that we teach our folks at LCB. We want to tap into long-term memories. What happens with Alzheimer's disease is our short-term memory is affected. And so we want to tap into memories that our residents and that our loved ones are going to remember. And so photos and stories and books, especially music, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Usually music, if you're going to tap into music for somebody with Alzheimer's disease, you want to do so for music that they listened to or was popular when they were about 18 to 25 years old. That's going to be the music that's going to be most powerful for them. That's going to be the music that they'll remember the most. I'm a child of the 80s, and so whenever a song from the 80s comes on, I don't really have a connection to it, but if there's a song from the 90s, I was up in that time, I can sing every word, and I don't know how I can still remember it, right? And so oftentimes what we're looking for is the ability to cue that resident with a memory that's comforting. So rather than asking our resident or a loved one, I think about my mom and her dad when he had Alzheimer's disease, she would say, Dad, did you have lunch yet? What did you have for lunch? And he didn't remember what he had for lunch, and he didn't know if he had lunch. And so what that triggered for him was it kind of decreased his dignity, because it reminded him that he couldn't remember. It created anxiety for him that he couldn't remember. But if she began talking about memories of their days living in Paris when he was stationed in the military, that he could tap into, and that they could have a conversation with. And so it's really important that we tap into long-term memories and not short-term memories. We don't need to talk about the fact that it's 2020. Let's reminisce. Let's use the word reminisce instead of remember. One of the things we do at LCB is if we see that a resident or somebody that's living in our memory care community, oftentimes somebody with Alzheimer's disease, they may have repetitive questions or repetitive statements. So if you are on this Zoom tonight for a loved one and you're noticing that, typically that's a couple things. It could be anxiety, and so we want to look at the mental health of what's going on. How can we calm our loved one's anxiety in that moment? But it could be boredom or lack of engagement that's causing that repetitive behavior. So kind of being ahead of that and providing opportunities for that person to be engaged. In our communities, we have 8 to 10 programs each day in our memory care neighborhood so that our residents can participate in things socially, emotionally, physically, and cognitively. Those are what we call our 4 pillars throughout the day, so that our resident can really we can really be ahead of that repetitive behavior. Because when somebody's repeating things over and over, it's not all, sometimes we'll say, well, they have, they have dementia, that's why they do that. But there's still always a reason. There's still always a reason. Are they bored? Are they anxious? We still have to find the root cause of why that behavior is happening. We don't just do it because it's of dementia. There's still a deeper reason. We might notice some obsessive tendencies. So people may try to hoard objects, or they may have repetitive movements like clapping their hands or tapping on the table, or desiring to eat a lot. And so we want to provide somebody with things that are tactile. So if somebody's having obsessive tendencies like that, we can't just stop the behavior or that obsessive tendency without replacing it with something. So if somebody is hoarding objects, maybe we have them or help us organize things in the home. Or if somebody is, having that consistent tapping or clapping, we still need to give them something to do. Maybe they can sweep or rake or play the drums. We can be creative. But if we stop that behavior, that can actually be counterproductive if we don't replace it with something. It can create a lot of anxiety. Okay, my favorite. I told you I wasn't going to sing, but I might have to sing now. One of my favorite interventions to use if somebody's starting to lose their ability to speak. So with many different types of dementia, somebody can create something, develop something called aphasia, which is losing the ability to speak, or even anomia, which is word finding difficulties. So they're having a hard time finding the word, or they might replace the word table with the word banana, right? And kind of whatever word comes to mind. And one of the things you can do is, not only does it help with word finding, but it also helps develop that ability to harness language, keep language going, and it's really fun. And so it's a technique called melodic intonation therapy. And it's a music therapy technique that really puts music and words together to help somebody keep their articulators in shape and to really merge those two parts of the brain to help somebody sing or help somebody speak. If you have ever been with somebody who has pervasive Alzheimer's disease, they may slowly be losing their ability to speak and communicate. But if one of their favorite songs comes on, they might be able to sing every word. A great example is Glenn Campbell, right? Like a rhinestone cowboy, right? He had Alzheimer's disease, but he was able to sing his legendary music until the day he died because it's harnessed. Our music lies in our amygdala. Music lies in the part of our brain that's emotional. And, just like I noted before, the amygdala doesn't dissipate in the same way as the hippocampus does. So a great example of this is, so Joshua Freitas, he wrote a book called The Dementia Concept. It's a wonderful book if you're looking for a resource. It's called The Dementia Concept, Joshua Freitas, and he actually used to be a part of the LCB team. And he wrote in his book about using this technique with a gentleman he worked with who had Alzheimer's disease. And he was losing his ability to speak, but this gentleman really wanted to give a speech at his granddaughter's wedding. And so Josh worked with this gentleman for a couple months and was able to develop help with this man develop the speech he wanted to give. And they practiced the speech over and over to the tune, My Country 'Tis of Thee. This gentleman was a war vet. He was very proud of his country. He knew that song well. And so they practiced the speech over and over to that tune. And the day of his granddaughter's wedding, he got up there and he sang the speech to his granddaughter and her new husband. So that was really powerful. We use it a lot at LCB as just a simple way to communicate. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Good morning, my friend. Good morning to you. And a resident who's aphasic with Alzheimer's disease might be able to sing that back to me. Good morning to you. Because I'm singing the tune, Happy Birthday. We all know that tune. We've been singing it since we were very little. My 3-year-old knows all the words. And so that's way, way back in our long-term memory. And so it'll really help somebody speak. So love that one. Another really important one, if you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease, I'm gonna try to see if I can mute. I hear a little background noise. So hang on one second, everybody. Okay. When somebody's communicating to you, we really want to allow adequate time before we ask another question. So what happens oftentimes is we ask someone with Alzheimer's disease a question. They're processing the question, they're coming up with an answer. It's taking a little more time than usual because of processing difficulties, but they came up with that answer and they're about to communicate it back. But it was too much space and time for us socially, so we ask another question before, or we clarify the question before they're able to respond. So really allowing enough space and time. Another tip is to reduce distraction and spatial confusion. Yes, by limiting different things like mirrors. Mirrors can actually be really counterproductive for somebody with Alzheimer's disease if they see themselves and they become distressed. It may be because they're looking at somebody that they don't know. They don't remember themselves as a 70 or 80-year-old man or woman. They might remember themselves as a 30 or 40-year-old. So really important for us to, doesn't mean go and take all the mirrors down out of your home, but it does mean that if you're noticing that your loved one or is becoming distressed or anxious or maybe even quiet when looking in a mirror, it could be that. Another thing is that mirrors distort space. My husband and I have a big, large mirror in our basement or in our living room downstairs because it makes the space look bigger. It makes our space look larger. The last thing we want to do for somebody with Alzheimer's disease is distort space. So hold on one second. They're already having some difficulties with spatial awareness and color contrast. So we really don't want to do that anymore. So speaking of light, we want well-lit spaces. One thing for you guys to know is as we age and we develop this disease, there's a yellowing screen over our eyes that can darken as time goes on, making it really hard to see color contrast and depth perception. And so and actually making it hard to kind of see light. Sorry if you hear my 3-year-old downstairs. And so a couple things. We want to keep spaces well lit. More dim spaces are actually going to create something called sundowning, which is when somebody with Alzheimer's disease has a hard time recognizing if it's daytime or nighttime, and it creates confusion and some behavioral disturbances for them. So we want well-lit spaces. If you're up for the day, turn the lights on. Let's get that natural melatonin going through light. And then leaving those lights on, not turning them too dim in a space that we want somebody to avoid, but really leaving lights on can help combat that. Another piece of this is to avoid dark rugs. So one of the techniques that used to be forever ago was a technique is if you wanted to try to avoid somebody from walking into a certain space, put a dark rug, they won't go there. We don't want to do that because that's a scare tactic. And what happens is because of the way that we're seeing spatial awareness around us with this disease, it can look like a hole. It can be perceived as very scary. And so we want to make sure that we avoid things like that altogether and really looking at the environment. If somebody's having some sort of anxiety, we want to look at light. We want to look at these little things that could be a simple environmental fix, because as you saw, that brain is degenerating. And so it's seeing the world at a totally different space, as well as what's happening to the optical nerves. I know that's a lot of information. Okay, so we're going to move on to vascular dementia. And I see some new folks have joined us, so welcome to this Zoom. So vascular dementia is the second most common type of dementia, characterized by many strokes or many TIAs that somebody's having that they may not even really know that they're having. But what's happening is it's causing inconsistent blood flow to the brain. What's also happening is it's going to fluctuate in signs and symptoms. So somebody could be having a really, really good day. With vascular dementia, I had a resident I was working with so many years ago, and her husband said to me, "My wife is getting better." And it was so hard for me because, as we know, vascular dementia is progressive. And so it wasn't necessarily that she was getting better, but she was having some really great days. And she was having bad days as well, but the good days were more frequent. And so it felt like she was getting better. And so And I just said to him, I said, you know what? She's having some awesome days. She certainly is. And so there's lots of fluctuating signs and symptoms with vascular dementia. Something that can actually increase confusion with vascular dementia is high active days. So if there was a lot going on, right? If somebody exercised a couple times that day, they had company over, which I know is different in COVID world. Maybe they had a couple appointments and the like. So the next day we would expect that maybe they would have more cognitive confusion. Highly active days, high levels of exercise, that actually is going to increase confusion for vascular dementia. So we want to strive for light exercise like chair yoga or Tai Chi. What we also might see with vascular dementia is a shuffle gait. So because of that inconsistent blood flow, you may have the feet may shuffle a little bit. So that's also a sign of that. I think I kind of said everything here. Oh yes, because of that inconsistent blood flow, somebody with vascular dementia, we're going to want them to, we'll encourage them to move their feet or their legs a little bit if they've been sitting for a long time before they stand up, because there may be some numbness or neuropathy and they may have a difficult time walking if we don't encourage them to do that. And then always making sure that we're working with a doctor to making sure steps are taken to control blood pressure, regulate our blood sugar, on all of those things. That's going to help that person maintain skills and abilities much longer. So it is possible to have mixed dementia. You can have two different types of dementia at the same time. My grandfather had Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. And if he developed a UTI during that time, UTIs actually create delirium, which is a reversible type of dementia. So there can be many different kind of cocktails that can go together. And you just want to work closely with a doctor on kind of what's going on there. So I'm just going to keep moving through and I'm going to open up for questions at the end. And of course I need to check time. So hold on one second. I need to be cognizant of that. Okay. We're doing great. So Lewy body dementia, the third most common type of dementia. So this is actually caused by a buildup of protein in the brain that are actually called Lewy bodies. And what this is going to do is it's going to disrupt brain function in a way that it disrupts sleep, actually. So what happens is somebody with Lewy body dementia, those Lewy body buildup of protein, it's keeping somebody from hitting a full REM sleep. They're never hitting full REM. So they're constantly living in a state of disillusionment. They're having a hard time knowing if they're in a dreamlike state or if they're in a reality. And so they're going to have a hard time with that. They may hallucinate. And that cognitive confusion may create some behavioral disturbances. If you followed any of the news reports around Lewy body dementia, this was actually the dementia that it came out that Robin Williams had before he ended up taking his own life. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Lewy body dementia is in the Parkinson's family. It is a Parkinsonian dementia, but it was developed in discovered in autopsy that he did have Lewy body protein in his brain. And so, Robin Williams had struggled with drug and alcohol relapse, and he had struggled with other sort of mental health. And then on top of his Parkinson's, it was kind of all chalked up that that's what was going on for him. But there was some deeper things that maybe they weren't aware of. And so some really important things for Lewy body dementia that is especially important in 2020. One of the things that we really make sure of at all of our LCB communities is that we really want positive stimuli on our memory care neighborhoods. And we want this for all different types of dementia, but especially for somebody with Lewy body, because somebody might see a negative stimuli on the news. So maybe an example is when I was visiting a different company to do an assessment on a resident during the Paris attacks that happened years ago. They had the Paris attacks in the kind of the waiting area on the news, and she had Lewy body dementia. It lodged a delusion for her, and she thought that the community was being attacked. So it created a lot of distress for her. So we want to get ahead of that, and we want to decrease that from even being a possibility. So we really like stimuli on the TV to be things like the ballet or a musical or I Love Lucy or stimuli from our residents' time. If we're having a delusion about a Tony Bennett concert, I'm not sure it would be all that dangerous. But another perfect example is a gentleman I was working with about 6 years ago who had Lewy body dementia, but he also had post-traumatic stress disorder from being in World War. And so he loved watching his Western movies. You know, it was of his time. He loved Western movies, and he was watching a Western in his room. And he came out of his apartment on the attack. He had his walker, and he came out, and he was in distress, and he was looking to defend himself. And essentially what happened was all of that gun violence that he was watching on that show lodged a delusion, from his Lewy body dementia buildup protein. He thought he couldn't tell if he was in a dreamlike state, if that was really happening. But it also lodged a trauma trigger from his time being at war. And so we could have avoided that by really, being preventative in what he was watching. Something that can be really great for somebody with vascular dementia and Lewy body and other forms of Parkinson's disease is something called rhythmic auditory stimulation. This is an occupational therapy technique that uses the use of a steady beat to help with gait and walking. And so we really like to use non-pharmacological approaches. Doesn't mean our residents aren't on medication. We can't get through life without medication sometimes, but we try our best to implement non-pharmacological approaches as it relates to all different things, but particularly things like this. And so it's use of a steady beat, like the song, "Off we go into the wild blue yonder." So you said I wasn't going to sing. Now it's the third time. To help somebody walk. So if you think about it, when you hear that steady beat, it encourages somebody to march their feet to the beat. And so it's a more dignified way than saying, "Okay, pick up your feet, Mom. Okay, Mom, pick up your left foot. Okay, Mom, you can do it. Put the other foot in front of the other," which can really compromise someone's dignity. But rather it's a song that you both enjoy. There's a steady beat. You have it on the phone or on the Alexa, or you sing it. And you can walk together in a way that's a little bit more dignified. I love that one. Okay. Frontal temporal dementia. So this impairs somebody's ability to keep a routine is the biggest, and understand social cues. This makes it all that much more important, though, to maintain a set structured schedule. So another big piece of this is frontal temporal dementia actually degenerates in a different order, a different way than perhaps Alzheimer's disease. So we may see more behavioral disturbances because that increased confusion. Another piece of frontal temporal dementia is it can affect somebody quite young. I have worked with people as young as 55 who had pretty pervasive frontal temporal dementia. LCB partners with Mass General's Frontal Temporal Dementia Clinic. So we do a lot of work with the FTD clinic at Mass General. And I have, gotten to meet folks with FTD who are as young as, 39, 40 years old. It does progress much quicker. And this is one of them that does have a hereditary component. We talk about Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease isn't necessarily hereditary. It can be sporadic or familial, meaning it can run in families. Doesn't mean it will hit every generation. There are some strands that will, but typically Alzheimer's disease is more sporadic. So it's lifestyle factors, age, things like that. But FTD does have a higher genetic component to it. And so some helpful hints for FTD is we really need to hone into social cueing. So, and really the nonverbal communication. And so you may want to use gestures alongside of just a verbal communication. And this can be for all different types of dementia, right? Not just FTD. But so much of how we communicate is nonverbal. I don't even remember if my nonverbal slide is in this PowerPoint. It very well might be. I like to put it in all of them, but really 7% of how we communicate is what we say. I am saying so much information right now. You're only going to retain 7% of what I actually say. But really 93% of the way that we communicate is nonverbal. So it's what I'm doing with my body language, which you can only see half of my body, but how I'm trying to, keep my hands going and try to make eye contact with you guys, which is difficult. And it's the inflection in our voice, you know, that's how we retain, that's really how we communicate. And so we need to increase that tenfold as it relates to somebody with FTD, because they're relying on nonverbal social cueing to get through their day. We also really need routine. So somebody with FTD is going to not be able to, you know, other types of dementia, routine is going to actually maintain a little easier. Somebody with FTD, they're going to fall out of routine much easier. So we really want to make sure that we keep a steady routine. I worked, the gentleman I was mentioning who I worked with, he was about 55 years old. He lived in the memory care neighborhood I was supporting at the time, and he was having a hard time assimilating in the community. And I asked his wife, I said, you know, did he have a kind of a bedtime routine? Because we really feel like if we could get him a solid night's sleep, that he would assimilate in a little better. His circadian rhythms were all off. And she said, actually, yeah, you know, each night after we would have supper together, he'd clean up all the dishes. He'd make a lunch for me for the next day. He'd fold my clothes for work. Remember, they're in their 50s, they're not retired. And he'd have a warm cup of milk and he'd read a book. And I said, well, that's pretty structured. So we recreated that for him. After supper, he would help the kitchen, the culinary team clean up. He would make a mock lunch for his wife. We couldn't have an iron in memory care because of safety issues, but he would put, you know, some of his wife's clothes on a hanger and hang it up. He'd have a warm cup of milk and he'd read a book. And, you know, after a few weeks, that became such a routine for him, and it was so ingrained that it was kind of second nature, and he was able to get back on a better routine. This is probably later in the slide, but I'm going to mention it now. It takes about 35 days for somebody with a cognitive impairment to learn a new routine, or to learn something new, or to make or break a habit. Just because somebody has dementia doesn't mean they can't learn something new, or that they can't learn a new habit. They absolutely can. It's just going to take them a little longer. So if you or I, oops, can you guys still see my screen? Hold on. Oopsies. Sorry, I'm having a, there we go. Sorry. Hold on. There we go. If you or I, while I get back to my slide I need, there it is. If we wanted to make a new habit, if we wanted to try working out every day, or getting to bed early, or stop smoking, or whatever it is, if we implemented a steady routine every day for 21 days, is what statistics say, our brain chemistry would shift and change in a way that it would make it a new habit. Somebody with dementia, any type of dementia really, it's going to take them just a little bit longer, about 35 days. But I think that's hopeful, because somebody with dementia can learn something new. They can learn a new habit. They can break old habits. And so with this gentleman, we had to make sure we stuck true to this routine. We couldn't give it a week, and if it didn't work, give up and say, oh, it didn't work. We had to stick with it for a good month, a good 30 or more days, for us to make a decision on if that was going to be successful for him. And it actually really was. So that's a great tip. If you're caring for someone with dementia and you're trying to implement a new routine, give it a good month. As long as it's not causing harm or a catastrophic reaction, then stick with it and give it the opportunity to work. So another thing that's really helpful with FTD is using photos or images like a toilet, a picture of a toilet on the bathroom door. That's going to help somebody maintain independence to find the bathroom on their own. A night light is really great. If somebody gets out of bed and they're looking for the bathroom, their cognition will follow the light, and it'll be right there. They can remain independent in finding it and not get lost. The kitchen's this way, the living room's this way. So simple things you can do in your home, things that we would do in our communities for our residents, that you can recreate to help them maintain those skills and abilities. You know, we follow what we call a habilitation model, which is a model that the Alzheimer's Association uses, meaning we don't look to rehab a resident's skill if they've lost it. We can certainly hire or contract with physical therapists or rehabs that can help that, but we really look to habilitate the skills that our residents have. So we want to make sure that they don't lose skills and abilities. So to really hold on to the ones they have. And so those are some great tips to do so. Okay, so that's kind of those are kind of the main different types of irreversible dementias. So let's kind of talk about some things overarching as it relates to medication and interventions and things like that. So we know that there currently is no medication that prevents or slows down Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. It's only going to mask signs and symptoms. So an example is if you have the flu, you have a sore throat, you have a fever, and you have a headache. So you might take some ibuprofen or some Tylenol, and that's going to mask the symptoms of a sore throat, a fever, and a headache temporarily, but it's not going to cure you of the flu. It's just going to mask your signs and symptoms of the flu. So these memory medications like Namenda or Aricept or the patch or all these other ones, they're going to do a similar thing. They're not curing the disease. They're not slowing down its process of progression necessarily. Some research is saying it does do that by a sliver, but it's masking the sign, it's calming the noise. And so that they're able to be more present in their day. But more research is showing us, which makes my job so exciting, but more research is showing us that what really will help potentially prevent and slow down the progression of the disease is being engaged in your life, living a purposeful, engaged life. So doing things that physically stimulate you, going for a walk, having a dance party, which is my favorite thing to do, cleaning your house, things that get your blood flowing, maybe taking a online yoga class, or, different things that you can do, going to the pool and going swimming at the Y, or whatever it is. I know COVID restricts us to doing some things right now, but getting the heart rate up in a way that's safe. So physically engaged in your life, socially engaged in your life. Being social is one of the greatest things you can do to help slow down or prevent this disease. Again, I know COVID is giving us a run for our money, but here you are on this Zoom, whether it's to support yourself or a loved one. And so this is an opportunity for that. Cognitively engaged. So what are we doing to create some cognitives to stump our brain a little bit? So Sudoku or reading or trivia or watching Jeopardy or whatever it is that kind of gets our brain, our cognition going, journaling, whatever helps. And then emotional. So social, emotional, physical, and cognitive. So emotionally stimulating things. So prayer, like I said, journaling, knitting, things that help you feel stimulated, talking with a good friend, having a good cry. Those are things that research is showing can help slow down or prevent this disease. And so I just think that's powerful because it puts the ball back in our court. Yes, in modern day medicine, there are so many things that can be accessible and that can be supportive. I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV. And there is lots of research right now around medication and the Alzheimer's gene in particular. But one thing to remember is this idea of cascading effect. So if somebody's on, I'm just say Namenda for memory, and maybe Namenda gives them dry mouth, let's just say. And so now they're drinking a lot more water, but they're not getting to the bathroom like they need to, or they're having incontinence, and now they have a urinary tract infection. And so now they need to take an antibiotic for that UTI, but the UTI gives them some stomach challenges. And so now they're on a probiotic, right? All for a memory med that maybe isn't doing as much as truly just accessing those 4 pillars of engagement. Now that's, again, modern day medicine is powerful. So it's certainly something we can access, but just food for thought. And again, over medicating somebody. So being on if that cascading effect happens and now we're on all of these different medications to balance out all the other ones, that too much medication can actually create a secondary form of dementia called delirium, like we've talked about. So just being careful of those things and talking to the doctor about it. Well, we already talked about this, so I gave away this answer, how long it can take a person to develop something new or make or break a habit. So that's 35 days. So really, again, I think that's hopeful because it allows us to know that just because we have an irreversible dementia diagnosis doesn't mean we can't learn new things. At LCB, we implement something called novel learning into our residents' day. So each month, our residents get the opportunity to learn something new, whether it's a different language or a painting class or learning a ballroom dance. So that novel learning, because of this research, is something that can really keep the brain neural pathways going. And so we can assist with that in our engagement program. Another common myth, and we've talked about this with dementia, is that there's nothing we can do to reach that person anymore. They're no longer who they once were. I can't reach them. I can't talk to them. I can't know them. They can't be a functionality. I can't function with them in my day. Well, I hope what I shared at the beginning about these two parts of the brain helps you to know that that's truly just a myth. Because that hippocampus, that memory center part of the brain that controls logic, reason, fact, because that's deteriorating and shrinking and taking a back seat, that amygdala is taking a front seat. That amygdala, the emotion part of our brain that remembers the smell of homemade apple pie or pumpkin pie every Thanksgiving that we've been making for years as a family, or that remembers the song that they walked down the aisle to on their wedding day, or that remembers the birth of their firstborn child, that remembers being stationed in France as a family during time in the military. Those are the things that can still be accessed. And so it's not that we can no longer reach that person. It's just knowing how to. And again, that's going to be sensory based and emotional based information. Long-term memory, smells, songs, memories that were from somebody's past, not memories from yesterday, or sometimes not even memories from 5 years ago, right? They may not remember the birth of a grandchild, but they may still remember the birth of their child. Something to remember is, okay, so depression. We definitely have to talk about this. I'm trying to keep it hopeful and light, but here's one piece. 60 to 80% of folks living with dementia also suffer from significant depression. That's a high majority. And so we can certainly understand why that would be, right? All of the different changes that are going on to the brain, people's understanding of the world around them, their lives shifting and changing. But also just remember from what I shared about what happens to our that darkening screen. Looks like I have somebody in the chat. Okay, I'm going to answer that question, Gail, in just a minute. How are things diagnosed? I'll answer that question for you. That darkening screen as time goes on. I mentioned it's a yellowing screen and it makes us difficult to see color contrast. But what also happens is it decreases our exposure to both natural and artificial light. And so natural and artificial light increases some of those feel-good hormones in our brain, like serotonin and serotonin and dopamine. And so we, again, like I shared before, helping somebody have exposure, take a walk out in the sun, sit by the light, sit by the window and have some light shedding in during the day. Exposure to light can help combat some of that depression, as well as so many other things, but we're running out of time, so I gotta keep going here. So this is our last couple slides, and then I'll answer that question. Wandering. So if you're somebody that's worried about wandering for a loved one, yes, wandering is a symptom of dementia. But if you ever were to have a loved one, let's say, walk out the front door and go missing, somebody is going to wander in the direction of their dominant hand. So if they walked out the front door and they're a lefty, they're going to wander to the left. So you want to start your search that way. And if they're a righty, of course, they're going to wander to the right. Of course, they can turn themselves around as they go, but if it's just been a few minutes, they're going to wander in that direction of their dominant hand. And then some things to help prevent from wandering from happening. These are triggers for wandering. And so this is something, it's not always that somebody's wandering. There's two different types. There's wandering with an agenda and without an agenda. Sometimes, we may notice somebody in our community is looking out the window. They think they see a car that's theirs, and suddenly they have a delusion that they need to go to work, right? Or there's somebody that's simply wandering because those neural pathways are jumping, but they're dying off and they're not going to action step. So the person is just kind of wandering around the neighborhood or wandering around the house. But here are some triggers for wandering. And 41% of the time, in this particular study that was done, they saw a suitcase And so they wanted to leave. They wanted to pack up it was just, they had dementia. Their one neural pathway led to the next. 27% of the time they saw a coat or a hat and they thought that it was time to go. Maybe there was a change in their routine, change in their medication. They simply heard someone say goodbye. We always talk in our communities about shift change. 3 o'clock, our first shift is leaving and our second shift is coming in. And we really want that to not be something our residents feel, because they're going to see coats and hats. They're going to hear people saying goodbye, and that can trigger a desire to wander. And so we really like to have our residents in an engagement opportunity during shift change so that they don't even feel that hustle and bustle and they don't get that anxiety. Saying goodbye can create a lot of confusion and anxiety for somebody with cognitive impairment, and so, or a form of dementia. And so we look for other ways to transition without saying goodbye. And just some other little tips. I think that I shared all of this actually. Let me just see. I shared all of this. Great. And so people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel, which I think is a powerful quote by Maya Angelou. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I know that there was a question in the chat. And so various types of dementia identified. So this is always a question I get. And so a couple different answers. So you definitely want to work with your doctor, because yes, there's going to be blood tests. There may be an MRI needed, but typically it starts with a mini cognitive assessment. So an MMSE. So a mini cognitive assessment will be done. Somebody will score. If somebody has mild cognitive impairment though, and it's not actually a diagnosable dementia of Alzheimer's or vascular or the like, they're going to actually score pretty well on an MMSE, and it might not be caught as mild cognitive impairment. So we typically would recommend something called a MoCA, a Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which does more of the spatial awareness stuff, and that would catch mild cognitive impairment quicker. But yes, we want to have work with your doctor. They may recommend an MRI, they may recommend blood tests, they may recommend all sorts of different things if they think that it used to be that we were only able to diagnose these things with autopsy. And now, obviously, there's so many different ways that a doctor or a neurologist can catch this. So it would really be up to the discrepancy of the doctor that you're working with. So that's my presentation. I think we're probably over time, but I'm happy to take any questions. If you know how to type in the chat, feel free to do that. If you want to unmute yourself, if you want to raise your hand and I can unmute you myself. If you don't have any questions, that's okay too. I also am willing to give my email address out. I know some of you have emailed me before, so whoever invited you to this, whatever, if you got this from a flyer or from Brittany or Kaylin or Jennifer, they can give you my email address, and they know that I'm happy to communicate through email and even phone call if that's necessary. To be a resource for you if there are any questions that come up, you know, tomorrow, like, oh man, I wish I asked that. So that's always an option too. So I'm just going to give it a minute to see if anybody has any questions. Hopefully that means I gave you all the information you could ever need. Okay. Well, guys, I thank you. I know that this is normally when we do these, I said this last month and every time, you know, I love being able to have, you know, an hors d'oeuvre with you at whether it's at Salem Woods or Silver Square or Pearl Street and chat with you after and get to know you and shake your hand. And I'm so sorry that 2020 has given us other plans, but luckily I can see most of your faces and I hope this was impactful. So feel free to get back to the girls and if you want a recording or more information. And as always, LCB is a resource. And we're grateful that you came on tonight.
Thank you, Amber. We appreciate your time.
All good. Thanks, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your week and happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. And so our next series will be December. I should know. Let me look. Hold on. Our last series. I'm an old school girl. I still use a planner like this. Let's see.
December 9th, we have 9th.
December 9th. And that's going to be how to connect and engage and care for someone with dementia. So we're going to cover a little bit more of those tips. We're going to dive into them deeper, but it's also going to be self-care for the caregiver and self-care for you. So if you're a caregiver or you're somebody that's feeling like you might be developing this disease, it's going to talk about ways to take care of yourself as well. All right. Sending love to all of you. Happy Thanksgiving.